Welcome into the On3 studios here in Nashville, Tennessee. It is Monday. We are ready for another loaded episode of the Inside Scoop. Appreciate you all for being here. How we feeling today? It's Monday. The offseason is just getting started. It's going to be a long one, but recruiting is going to get us through this thing. And over the weekend, there was a big Under Armour camp in Georgia. It was actually at Carrollton High School. That's where five-star QB Julian Lewis is at. We're going to have Director of Recruiting Chad Simmons on with some intel on Julian Lewis and a bunch more. But before we get going, let's take a look at the current top 10 rankings for the 2025 cycle. You see LSU Tigers on top, Ohio State, Georgia, that's your top three. Ohio State nipping at the heels of LSU. Clemson and Notre Dame round out your top five. Oregon, Florida State, Texas, Auburn, and then there's a new addition to this top 10. That's the Florida Gators, because over the weekend, they got a second top 150 prospect on Sunday. Like I said, Billy Napier's Florida Gators jumped 2 spots to the 10 position in the 2025 in industry team rankings. Now, they landed over the weekend a 4-star interior offensive lineman. His name is Peyton Joseph, and it was a big win for the Gators. He picked UF over Tennessee and Florida State. Looked like FSU might have had the edge going into this decision, but the Georgia 4-star offensive lineman is heading to Gainesville. He's the nation's 123rd overall prospect and 5th best interior lineman in the country. So like I said, big show today. We're going to have Chad Simmons here in a minute with all his intel from Under Armour. Then we're going to talk Michigan's most important recruiting target with Zach Libby. Then Auburn insider Cole Pinkston. He's on to talk about a few recruits that are trending in Auburn's direction. Like I said, it's a big show today, so let's get to it. Let's bring on Director of Recruiting here at On3, Chad Simmons, and we're going to talk a little Under Armour intel. So why not start with Julian Lewis? I mean, the camp was at his school, so of course Julian Lewis was going to be there. You spoke to Lewis, who is committed to USC. What did you learn from Julian in this interview?
Look, Josh, he's committed, but still taking visits, and what does that mean? That to me means that his commitment's far from over, definitely not locked in and locked down with USC. Obviously still feels good about that commitment. There were some changes there in the off season with Cliff Kingsbury leaving, going back to the NFL and, other coaching changes. But I think the biggest thing that keeps Lewis committed to USC right now is Lincoln Riley, his development, his history with quarterbacks. And, obviously the LA lifestyle is intriguing to Lewis, who is really trying to capitalize on the NIL and his name, image, likeness, and all of that stuff as well. But this recruitment, I think, is far from over. I think there'll be many trips this spring, a few in the summer. And I think based on what I've picked up the last couple of weeks from Juju and his camp, likely won't lock this up until maybe early in his senior season or right before, late summer, in his, I guess, right before his senior year starts, I would say.
So he has not solidified his commitment to USC. I mean, I know Trojan fans are in the comment section all the time telling me that, hey, Julian Lewis is locked into this commitment. But Chad, you tell me he's still open to taking visits, so it doesn't sound like he's shut it down at all, does it?
No, if you're still taking visits, you're not shutting it down. I mean, you can be like Ryan Williams this year and be all Alabama, but if you're still going to Auburn and, Georgia and other places across the country, you're still keeping, one foot out the door, at least the door cracked for other schools to come in and recruit you and talk to you. And I think, in some ways that's smart, and the way college football is right now. So many coaches are picking up and moving and going to other places all the time. We saw that this weekend with Brian McClendon from Georgia going to the NFL with Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And so you want to keep those relationships. You don't know if the guy you're talking to from an opposing team right now might be your quarterback of the future in 2 years. So I understand, why Juju and other recruits do this, but that I would definitely not say this recruitment is done. USC fans can feel good. They're probably the top team, but his recruitment, I think, still is months away from being over.
Okay. Speaking of being over, Micah DuBose, the #1 interior offensive lineman in America and the #2 player in the state of Alabama, has been trending heavily to Auburn. Right now, the recruiting prediction machine shows Auburn at 94%. When I thought Micah DuBose was going to close this thing out and commit to Auburn maybe 6 weeks ago. Is there a team or teams out there that have his interest that maybe is giving him a pause when it comes to committing to Auburn?
Yeah, I know, Josh. He did. Commitment definitely crossed his mind. Even when he was still committed to Georgia late in the fall, there was some buzz about Auburn behind the scenes
Right.
being even the top team over Georgia, even at that time. And then obviously he opened his recruitment back up. Late in 2023, there's been a lot of buzz around Jake Thornton, Hugh Freeze, the Auburn Tigers program, in-state school. They were there multiple times in January to check on him. But that last visit on that weekend of February 3rd, went to another Tigers SEC program in Baton Rouge, LSU. They're a team that's picked up some momentum coming off that visit. And I think right now it's a battle at the top between those two Tigers. If I had to pick today which one's trending, I would lean towards more LSU. Brad Davis there. Joe Sloan's been involved. Obviously, Brian Kelly. I think right now another Tigers outside his home state is trending, but Auburn's still right there as well.
All right, LSU making this one a contest. Now we go from the number 2 player in the state of Alabama to the number 3 player in the state of Alabama. Now edge Zion Grady, he was at Under Armour over the weekend. You caught up with him, the 6'4", 210-pound edge, decommitted from Alabama after Saban retired. He's made a few trips. Do you see a team or two trending in his recruitment now that he's back on the market?
Yeah, I would say probably the hot name attached to Zion right now, Josh, is probably Georgia. He was back there in January. He was there for a game in the fall when he was committed to Alabama. When he picked Alabama, Georgia was high on his list as well. I think Georgia's probably the hot team I hear the most attached to Zion's name. And then I think Florida State, he's been there 4, 5, 6 times as well. He was back there last month also. He's in strong communication with that staff. He loves what Norvell is doing and has built in Tallahassee. And I think one team that he has yet to visit that recently offered that definitely intrigues him, and that's Ohio State. Obviously, their track record and Larry Johnson's resume of developing players off the edge. He loves Zion loves Chase Young. Obviously, Chase came from Ohio State, was a top pick in the NFL draft, and had a lot of success in the NFL at San Francisco and Washington. So I think those 3 schools, of course, Auburn's involved, other programs. You mentioned Florida as well. Going to Tennessee, I think, also in the spring. But I think if there's a school right now maybe trending at the top, it'd be Georgia.
All right. Now, speaking of trending to Georgia, we got wide receiver Travis Smith, top 200 prospect. He goes about 6'4", 200, and he has been trending to UGA. But who else is in his recruitment right now?
Yeah, I think, for me, I would say maybe 6 to 8 weeks has kind of started to shape up as, at least right now, Georgia versus Tennessee for Travis Smith. He'll be back at Tennessee in Knoxville. I think it's early April. He'll be there for a spring practice. And he has great connections with Kendall Pope, the receivers coach. Obviously, Josh Heupel, I think, is one of the most active head coaches in recruiting. He talks to Heupel a lot as well, as far as multiple staffers as well. So he has good connections there. And I think the biggest thing that Travis always makes clear is he wants to go to a program on the next level where he'll get the football. He wants to make plays. He doesn't want to just block on the perimeter. He doesn't want to be a decoy on the other side. He wants to make plays, and he wants to get the football. And we know Tennessee loves to throw. They play fast. They spread the ball out. They'll get the ball to their playmakers. So I think Tennessee right now is Georgia's biggest competition. And obviously, I mentioned before, Brian McClendon moving on from Georgia to the NFL. That was his lead recruiter, the receivers coach under Kirby Smart. Now, Georgia still, as Travis told me on Sunday, Georgia's still Georgia. Kirby's still Kirby. They still have the players, the rosters, all that appeals to him, and Georgia's still high on his list. He's very interested now to see, though, who Kirby hires as the new receivers coach. But I think if I had to mention someone outside of Georgia and Tennessee, don't sleep on Auburn. He'll be back there, I think, in March as well. He's been there before. We saw what Hugh Freeze, Marcus Davis, and that staff did with receivers with Cam Coleman, Perry Thompson, a great receiver group in that 2024 class. So I think Georgia and Tennessee are setting the pace right now, with Auburn right there as well.
Yeah, that is Travis Smith is an emerging prospect. I mean, great frame. It seems like his recruitment is only going to continue to blow up. Now, I wanted to talk about another one out of Alabama that's really good, and that's running back Alvin Henderson, number 99 ranked player overall in the 2025 class. What's the latest on his recruitment?
Well, he just kind of came out and said, I think his quote to me was something like, honestly, Chad, Florida State's my number one school, and I think, he was pretty open and pretty candid about, his connection with Coach Johnson, Coach Norvell, obviously what they're doing. I think the biggest thing that Alvin made clear to me about why he is so high on Florida State is right now the stability at the program. Norvell's there, that staff has pretty much remained intact. And we've seen, obviously Saban stepping down, a whole new staff at Alabama for the most part. We've seen, Hugh Freeze make numerous changes, including running backs coach for Alvin Henderson's recruitment, Cadillac Williams, being gone from the Plains. We've seen other programs lose coaches and hire new coaches, but Florida State has kept that consistency, and they've been with him since his freshman year. He's been there over half a dozen times, but I think right now he's made it pretty clear Florida State is the team to beat. Now, Auburn is always going to be in this. They're right there as well. Miami, he'll be back there this spring. He's been there one time. He loves how Cristobal is very much involved in his recruitment. He sees a path to play pretty early at Miami as well. And then you have Alabama still there. Robert Gillespie, he was retained by Kalen DeBoer. Those two have a good relationship. The first day Gillespie knew he was staying on staff at Alabama, he made that call to Henderson to let him know, hey, you're still a top target for me in Alabama. So numerous schools are still very much involved. But if I had to say who's right there behind Florida State, it would be Auburn and Miami right now.
It's going to be a hot recruitment down the stretch. Now, Chad, we kind of saw a flurry of commitments around the early December period for the 2025 class. I'm talking for the 2025 class. We saw a flurry of commitments around the early signing period, kind of around New Year's, but now we're in the dead period. Obviously, things kind of fell off without visits taking place. So for recruiting fans watching this, when do you think we'll see the country kind of heat back up with commitments again?
Yeah, I think it'll stay this way. I think you'll see, commitments here and there pop off. We saw Peyton Joseph to Florida on Sunday. I think you could see a surprise or two I've heard about behind the scene. I don't want to hint too much at those names right now, but I think you could see a couple of names come off maybe in March, possibly. But I really think it'll pick back up, mid to late spring. And obviously we know it will be sizzling come June and July when it's 100 degrees down here for us in the South, Josh. It'll be super smoking hot on the recruiting trail. But I think right now you're going to see more kids lock in those key spring and even official visits for spring and summer. You're going to see more and more kids trim that list down to top 10, top 8, top 5, whatever it may be in these coming weeks, maybe the next couple of months. But I think commitment-wise, it'll pick back up come, mid-late April into May, and then really heat up come June and July.
Yeah, those summer months, man, those are crazy right now for recruiting in this modern day era that we're in. Chad Simmons, he did a great job covering the Under Armour, tons of intel. I'll link the article in the description below. We hit on a fraction of the guys that he wrote about. So Chad Simmons, thank you for taking time on this busy Monday morning to talk on the Inside Scoop.
Anytime, Josh. Thanks for having me.
Despite Michigan going to the college football playoff over the last 3 years, with the latest appearance resulting in a national title, the Wolverines, well, they still haven't really capitalized on all this momentum on the recruiting trail. But Sherrone Moore had some strong words last week that lead me to believe it's a new day for Michigan recruiting. And today, I got Zach Libby on this video. He's a Michigan insider to talk more about the Wolverines' next step under Sherrone Moore. But before we get into it, Michigan fans, do me a favor, hit subscribe to the On3 Recruits channel. We're talking Michigan recruiting all offseason. It's going to be a blast. Make sure you hit subscribe. All right, let's bring on Zach Libby from the Wolverine. And Zach, Michigan landed one top 100 recruit in 2024. Do you think Sherrone Moore will have the same approach to recruiting as Harbaugh, or can Michigan fans expect Moore to be putting in more time and energy on the recruiting trail?
I mean, I think the same approach is going to be used in terms of being the lead ambassador for a Blue Blood program, leaving an impact where coaches and parents feel comfortable leaving their prospects, dropping off their prospects off at Michigan and making sure that Ann Arbor feels like a home away from home. But the unique approach that Sherrone Moore, I feel like, is going to bring to the recruiting trail is what you see from other Power Four head coaches, guys like Dan Lanning of Oregon, Marcus Freeman of Notre Dame, Ryan Walters of Purdue. You have these young, enthusiastic coaches with years of experience who know how to relate to recruits, but also be able to handle themselves as the face of a program and ultimately know what needs to be done on the recruiting trail. You saw this from Sherrone Moore right up from the get-go in the January contact period. You saw him in the West Coast, you saw him in the Deep South, you saw him in the Midwest, you saw him in the DFB. While he was completing his staff, he still got out to these schools and got face to face with top recruits and their handlers, to let people know that he is the guy and to trust his philosophies and recruiting coaching style as at the helm. But aggressive recruiting is going to be great for Sherrone, but which is exactly what Michigan needs. But I feel like, to be fair, it can only go so far as well. The ultimate goal that needs to be done with recruiting is that this aggressiveness that you've seen from Moore and his coaching staff, it needs to be paired with a competitive NIL initiative. That's what really is going to take recruiting for Michigan to the next level. I mean, this offseason has been marked with Michigan's inability to compete in the NIL realm. And quite frankly, it's refusal to compete in this NIL realm. Mm-hmm. I mean, with recruiting, if you're not using NIL as a tool, it's going to be tough to land these 5-star backs and these top 100 prospects. I mean, any key athlete that commands high market value, the embracement of NIL from university elite, that's what's going to be the make or break case in order to see the new heights for recruiting for Michigan, to go from top 20 recruiting classes, top 15 recruiting classes.
So do you think, though, is this another kind of burnt off season where they win the national title and they don't capitalize on the momentum, or is there still time for Moore to capitalize on this national championship momentum?
Yeah, I mean, there's still time, obviously. I mean, they just have their coaching staff.
Though.
There is ways or avenues, right? Like, you have your coaching staff finalized. You have brought in guys with several years or decades of recruiting experience. You have collectives from Michigan who are doing everything that they can to make sure that players are given their opportunities. But in the end, we have to see university leaders to embrace the NIL initiative, something that Sherrone Moore has gone on record saying that he is in full support of. So I think that unless we see that, I feel like we're going to come back here next year and say, it's just deja vu all over again.
All right. Well, the Michigan coaching staff, they are out recruiting. Well, not now because we're in the dead period, but they were in January. They hosted a lot of recruits in February. They'll get back to it in March. Let's start with some Michigan RPM trends, some prospects that are trending to Michigan on the recruiting prediction machine. We'll start with Alex Graham out of Detroit. He's a 4-star cornerback. Have you put in a prediction for Alex Graham, and what are your sources saying?
Yes, I've had a prediction in since November of 2022. So okay. Alex Graham, as you mentioned, he is a Detroit native. He attended Detroit Cass Tech for first 2 years of his high school career. He's been at IMG Academy since July of last year, but since the transfer, he's been to Michigan twice, including in late November for the Ohio State game. And then this past earlier this month in February for the final recruiting weekend of the contact period. That was huge for Michigan to get Graham up for that weekend. It was an opportunity for Graham and his family to sit down and talk in depth with Sherrone Moore. Overall impressions that Graham got from after speaking with Moore is that he knows what he's doing. And I feel like that's just a consensus from every recruit that we talked to about Coach Moore, considering the fact that Sherrone is, 4-0 as a head coach. But obviously, too, there's a lot of wait and see. When Graham was on campus in early February, Steve Cleescale, former defensive backs coach, was still on staff. But now that he's moved on to Los Angeles Chargers with Jim Harbaugh, when Graham found out, he was obviously disappointed. The plan right now is, to return for a spring camp practice, see how practices are run under the new staff, and meet with the new DB coach, which is Lamar Morgan, who was the defensive coordinator the last 2 years at Louisiana Lafayette. But I think there's still optimism to have Michigan as the leader. Grant, upon learning the new DC, Don Martindale, who's the innovator of that multiple front defense that Michigan has deployed these past 3 years, Graham was really excited about that. But overall, my prediction that's been going on for 16 months, is obviously due to his Detroit roots. He's been on 9 unofficial visits total His mother is an alumni of Michigan. We're just going to see what transpires this offseason, how the new staff can make an impact while recruiting Graham to get him back home.
All right, the next prospect we're going to talk about is defensive lineman Jalen Williams. Now, he's from the Chicago area, and he goes 6'5", 240, big, versatile defensive lineman that's trending to Michigan at 96% right now in the recruiting prediction machine. Are they close to closing this one out?
Yeah, this one's an interesting one. You feel like this was Michigan's to lose after Williams was visited for the Ohio State game. That's when all the predictions came in, including myself. But the loss of defensive line coach Mike Elston, who also left for the Chargers, that kind of swung the door open for other schools. Williams himself tweeted out that reporters are encouraged to change their picks. But the addition of Greg Scruggs, who's defensive line coach from Wisconsin, I feel like that puts Michigan back in the driver's seat and gives them that solid chance. Scruggs, was one who offered Williams. They had a relationship going back to Williams' sophomore year. Williams, who's from Chicagoland, has been to Madison on a couple of visits, including in late October for a game day visit. Pair that with, just seeing the level of dominance that Michigan has had as a defensive line. You got guys like Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant, who are bona fide first rounders in 2025. That certainly entices a kid like Williams. And, for him, who comes from an area in, Metro Chicago, Michigan has landed a signee in that area in every recruiting cycle since 2019. So that's Moore's area. So he's going to continue having a role in this recruitment. So pair that with Scruggs, and I feel like you should be confident that Michigan can garner back the momentum that they lost after Mike Elston left.
All right. Now, Avery Gash, we're going to move over to the offensive side of the ball. We're going to stay in the trenches. He's an interior offensive lineman, actually the number 2 player in the state of Michigan. Is he a must get, considering the number 1 player in the state of Michigan, Bryce Underwood, is already committed to LSU?
I've been hesitant to place an on-3 prediction for Michigan to land Gash. Not really because I don't think Michigan has any momentum. Certainly, he's been to Ann Arbor on 3 game day visits this past season, but it's just too early to call. Gash and his family have just been adamant that a commitment won't happen until official visits are done. So that's 4 to 5 months until he locks it in. So that gives time for schools like Georgia, Penn State, Ohio State, USC, Wisconsin, schools that have been on high on the radar to keep their foot on the gas pedal. But obviously with Michigan, he is the top priority on the board on offensive line for 2025. The coaching staff has let Gash know that. Coach Sharon Moore got in contact with Gash on the same day he was formally announced as head coach. He and Grant Newsome, the new offensive line coach, both stopped by Birmingham Groves to see Gash at his school during the January contact period. The staff is just showing such high interest in Gash's versatility to play any position on the line. And he has an open invite, right? He had lived less than 45 minutes away from Ann Arbor, so there's an open invite to come to any spring camp practice, which will be the case. But overall, this is a prospect that you just can't let leave the state, especially with so much that Michigan can provide an offensive lineman, right? Like elite development, winning 2 Joe Moore Awards in the past 3 years, having your head coach be an offensive line coach in his past coaching career, as well as a former offensive lineman. Pair that with your new offensive line coach, having played at Michigan, and it was brought up the coaching ranks under Coach Moore. I mean, the rest of the offseason, we're going to see the coaching staff make sure that every stone is turned over to ensure that Gash doesn't leave the state. So we'll see what happens this offseason.
Yeah, he's an important prospect. But I have a question. Do you think that number 1 safety DJ Pickett is Michigan's most important target on the board? Not from like a this will make or break the class perspective, but meaning if Michigan could go into the state of Florida, land a 5-star safety, the number 1 safety in America, it would make a major statement for Sharon Moore in this recruiting style that he's bringing to Michigan. So how important do you think DJ Pickett to Michigan is?
Of the 5 stars in 2025, DJ Pickett seems like the most likely that Michigan has a chance with. This, as far as how much of a priority he is for Michigan this cycle, as soon as Bryce Underwood came off the board, Pickett became the number one target for 25. Obviously, as you mentioned, there would be so much that can go into landing a kid like Pickett for Sherrone Moore in his first year, from the Tampa area, Zephyr Hills, the heart of Florida, just coming in, plucking him away from just elite schools that were on his top 5, like Oregon and others. But you gotta have to look at the facts too. A lot has changed since Pickett's last unofficial visit to Michigan, which was Kurt for the Ohio State game. Moore's head coach, Steve Clinkscale, is gone. Defensive coordinator Jesse Minter is gone. Strength and conditioning coordinator Ben Herbert is gone. Yeah. But from what we've got, right, exactly. But, from what we've gathered on Michigan's push, the promotion of Moore was seen as a good move for the junior. But obviously the loss of Clinkscale specifically has stung. No surprise. They had a great relationship. But there are a lot of ties to Michigan that are playing in favor of the national chance for a kid like Pickett. He has family in the Metro Detroit area, including his grandmother. His mother actually attended the University of Michigan. His older brother, played for Eastern Michigan, which is 6 miles down the road from Ann Arbor. But also, for a kid like him who saw the Ohio State game live, he also saw the Penn State game live in 2022. So he saw elite defensive back production live and just that overall environment at the Big House. But, if you see guys like, Rob Moore, who had that game-winning interception against the Buckeyes, the impacts of like Makari Page, Mike Sanderstill, Will Johnson, Josh Wallace, those guys had a huge, just role on a national championship team. And I feel like that's important to note and seeing what kind of contributions a kid like Pickett can make early. But, now with Lamar Morgan now hired, he obviously has to pick up the pieces in a short order to, weather the storm of having a guy like Steve Clinkscale leaving. We've heard a return that could be possible for the weekend of the spring game, which is in late April. So we'll just see how things shape out now that a new commander of the DBs is in place. But obviously having Michigan in that top 5 shows that Michigan is still high on the radar for him.
Yeah, and there's a long offseason. It's very young in this 2025 cycle. So Zach Libby, we're going to be talking a lot of Michigan recruiting this offseason. Appreciate you stopping by today on the Inside Scoop.
Appreciate it, Josh. Thank you.
Recruiting never sleeps. Hugh Freeze and his staff are full go on the recruiting trail right now. And today I got Auburn insider Cole Pinkston on the video. We're going to talk about how the Tigers keep recruiting rolling even through the dead period. But first, Auburn fans, do me a favor right now and hit subscribe to the On3 Recruits channel. We love talking to Auburn recruiting, and we want you to be a part of it, so hit subscribe for me, please. All right, let's bring on Cole Pinkston from Auburn Live, and we're going to talk about 4 recent Auburn predictions and where they're trending right now. But first, how is that Auburn QB board shaping up? Because the more I read about Julian Lewis, it kind of sounds like Auburn is right now on the outside looking in of his recruitment. So who would you consider maybe the top targets at the quarterback position for Auburn?
Yeah, Lewis was always going to be a tough get. He probably will visit again, but we're looking at 2 guys right now. It's Cutter Woods is a guy out of South Carolina, Taylor's, South Carolina, that was recently offered. And if you're going to offer a quarterback, in February, then he's a big deal. So we're watching him closely. The other guy's from California, TJ Lateef, who has interest from Ole Miss, Texas A&M, lots of schools. Nebraska, I think, is a school that's really high on his list. But he tells me, as soon as I get down there to Auburn, I think Hugh Freeze has something up his sleeve. That's a school that I'm very interested in, want to see, want to get to know more about. And Hugh Freeze and his staff are going to go visit him and watch him throw as well when they get the chance. So those 2 right there.
Okay, yeah. I kind of got the feeling that Julian Lewis maybe wasn't a realistic possibility right now, but those 2 right there now that Auburn could take advantage of. Let's talk about these 4 recent Auburn predictions. We're going to start with running back Alvin Henderson. He had a great showing at the Under Armour camp in Georgia over the weekend. What are you hearing now about Auburn and Alvin Henderson?
Yeah, that was one of those predictions that I put in because, and it was a while back, it just seemed like Auburn was the leader. It wasn't even close. He's from in-state. Cadillac Williams at the time was huge. Now Auburn doesn't have Cadillac Williams. They have Derek Nix, who has started to build a good relationship with him. But meanwhile, Florida State, that's the team that that Mike Norvell and his staff has been together, and that's something that means something to him, is longevity with the staff and the position coach being around. So it seems like they have some momentum right now, but Auburn also pushing back and trying to stay in the race with him. I think those are the two that are emerging the most to me, Auburn and Florida State. Auburn's got to hang on. It's always felt like Auburn's to lose Alvin Henderson because he's right down the road, and they need a running back so bad. But they're going to have to outlast Florida State because I think they're surging.
Yeah, I think March visits are going to be really important with this one to see when the recruiting calendar opens back up for the contact period and where Alvin Henderson makes his first visits. I think that could be very important coming out of the dead period. All right, let's talk about another one that had been trending to Auburn for a while. That's offensive tackle Micah DeBose. When he decommitted from Georgia, I thought it was a shoo-in that he was going to land at Auburn. But now it sounds like there's some competition. You talked to him at Under Armour. What are you hearing on Micah DeBose?
Yeah, this time of year, trending is the right word to use because sometimes you're trending and it doesn't come to a commitment. It seemed like he was going to commit to Auburn. That was the thought. He had visited a couple times, then opened it up and told us, Auburn had a 75% chance to flip him from Georgia when he was still committed. It's just some eye-opening quotes, but lately it's LSU getting some buzz. Ohio State's getting some buzz. I think LSU, though, after a visit, really stole some momentum there. And, again, Auburn's trying to keep a guy in state, just like with Alvin Henderson. They've got a fight on their hands, and if it's anything like it was a year ago, Auburn's not going to go away, and they're going to be in it. But, again, like you said, trending, I would say LSU might be the trending school here for now, with Auburn trying to stay in it.
All right, I want to flip to the defensive side of the ball, talk a little linebacker. Eric Winters, he's a 4-star. Is he a top priority right now for Auburn at the linebacker position?
Yeah, he's a top priority overall. I mean, I'd say he's top 10 targets overall for Auburn. Has been for a while. That's a prediction I put in, a couple months ago because Auburn had some confidence. Things were going really well, and things are still going really well. I think Georgia's in the picture, though. This is a fun time of year when it's hard to pin down exactly where things are. You're not coming to a close. So Auburn had to flip a ton of guys a year ago. So you might have some early commitments that maybe leave you scratching your head some. I still think, though, that Auburn is in great position with Eric Winters and has a chance to make an early commitment there and get an early commitment from him. So I like that pick. I'm going to hold on to it, even though I know that Georgia is a big factor in his recruitment as well.
All right, let's use that word trending again, and we're going to talk about offensive tackle Tavares Dice. He's been trending to Auburn. He's also made a bunch of visits. How do you feel about Tavares Dice, and when do you think that he could shut this thing down?
I feel the best about Auburn's chances with Dice out of the four.
Okay,
I like a lot where Auburn stands with him. I mean, I really think he moved his commitment timeline up now to March, which he told me when he was at Auburn on February 3rd that it was going to be in the summer. And before that, he told me it was going to be next fall. So he's been moving it up steadily, and it's Auburn. He keeps 6 visits now, I think, 5 or 6. Finally brought the family on the last visit to Auburn, and they seem to love it. That's been the buzz, and I think Auburn's trending big there.
So how important would it be to get him on board at this point of the cycle?
The utmost, because Auburn struggled with offensive line recruiting. And any Auburn fan and Auburn, coaches would tell you, for some reason we've had trouble getting a big O-line class, and that's what they got to have in 25. They have a guy right now, Spencer Dolan, committed offensive lineman from in-state. Tavares Dice would help get that ball rolling again and help you get some momentum back with some of these other O-line targets, I think.
Yeah, and, Auburn recruiting, it's always on fire. So once we come out of this dead period in March, I'm sure we're going to pick up some new commitments. Cole Pinkston, thank you for taking the time today on a early Monday morning to talk on the Inside Scoop.
Absolutely. Appreciate it.
Thank you for watching this video, and if you enjoyed that, go check out the hundreds of videos that we have on this channel, and also do me a favor, hit subscribe to the On3 Recruits channel.